How evil is too evil in anime? Let's find out. I've put together a list of some of the most unhinged characters ever written, and trust me, you'll want to stick around until the end, because numbers 1, 7, and 12 are absolutely guaranteed to boil your blood. Coming in at number 1, it's Shou Tucker from Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. He's one of the only truly irredeemable characters ever written, and I don't just mean in anime or manga. I mean in all of fiction. You see, Tucker was so desperate to keep his state alchemist certification that he alchemically fused his 5-year-old daughter Nina with the family dog Alexander to create a talking chimera. And then, as if that wasn't horrific enough, it's revealed that he pulled the same thing on his wife 2 years earlier, and he shows absolutely zero remorse whatsoever. In fact, he lied that his wife just left, when the truth is that he turned her into a chimera that eventually stopped eating and died just to end her own misery. And when Edward and Alphonse call him out, Tucker gaslights them. He twisted back on them and says they're the same, since they also messed with alchemy when they tried to resurrect their mother. Just pure evil. I have no words. No wonder even Scar, who'd already seen humanity at its absolute worst, was so disgusted he killed Tucker on the spot. But is he really as evil as Father or Kimberly? Here's the thing. Even though Tucker's crimes are smaller in scale than the main antagonists of Full Metal Alchemist, what he did was so personally sickening that, for many fans, Tucker is still the single most evil anime character they've ever seen. Next, we move to a man who destroyed his friends for a kingdom. It's Griffith, or rather Femto from Berserk. Griffith was the charismatic leader of the Band of the Hawk, a literal symbol of hope. But after his downfall, and especially after a year of torture and imprisonment, he hit a point of absolute rock bottom where his dream of a kingdom seemed lost forever. Then, right after Guts and the others free him, Griffith, in a moment of ultimate weakness, activates the Crimson Ballet during the eclipse. That single choice unleashes what is, without a doubt, the most infamous betrayal in all of anime history. He sacrificed his entire mercenary band, the very people who loved him, fought for him, and followed him through everything. Also, he could be reborn as Femto, a member of the God Hand. And it didn't end there. The betrayal itself was unforgivable as is, but Griffith pushed it even further. He sadistically Casca in front of Guts, who raged as hard as he could but couldn't do a thing. And this wasn't out of lust or casual cruelty, it was a completely unhinged attempt to destroy Guts. At the same time, it symbolically marked Griffith's full abandonment of his humanity. Now, sure, you could argue that he was fated to become this, but let's be clear, fate doesn't mean moral ambiguity. Yes, Griffith is written as a complex villain, but not sympathetic. He put his desires above his humanity, and the narrative makes it clear. The actual choice to sacrifice the Band of Hawk was his. Actually, Griffith did nothing wrong. My ass. Moving on at number 3, let's talk about a JoJo character who's responsible for almost all of the events in the main universe. It's Dio Brando. Dio is such a black hole of evil that villains across the world like Greyfly worship him as an evil savior, and thanks to his charisma, he even corrupts ordinary people. For example, if Dio never filled Pucci's head with the Heaven Plan, Pucci would never have become an apocalyptic villain. Now, yes, Dio has a tragic backstory. Born in the slums of London, he grew up with an abusive, alcoholic father and lost his mother at a young age. But that doesn't justify anything. Even after being given a better life by the Joestar family, Dio still chose to embrace evil. In fact, Speedwagon, best waifu himself, who lived through a similarly rough life, calls him out and flat out says Dio would have been a monster no matter what. And you see that from the very beginning. On day 1, he kicks Jonathan's dog, Danny. And you know the rule. Once you kick a dog in fiction, you're done. Unless you're Boa Hancock, but even she wouldn't throw a puppy into a furnace. Yes, the moment Dio reveals himself as pure evil is when he burns Danny alive in a furnace. From there, it still somehow keeps getting worse and worse. He abandons his humanity and becomes a vampire. He turns people into zombies, and there's that scene where a mother eats her own baby after becoming a zombie. His obsession with Jonathan drives him to steal Jonathan's body, kill him in front of Arena, and then use that body to go Genghis Khan mode. Dio's villainy is pure narcissism. Everything he does is for himself, and he makes that abundantly clear with lines like, "It was me, Dio." Alright, so from a flamboyant narcissist to a shy one, number 4 is Muzan, the king of demons from Demon Slayer. His villainy is rooted in a single fundamental fear: mortality. Born over 1,000 years ago, he had no pulse or breath, and his family nearly cremated him alive. He was always sick, and it was said he'd die before he turned 20. In a fit of paranoia, he killed the doctor who was treating him with an experimental medicine because he thought the man was making him worse. Little did he know, the treatment worked, but it also turned him into a demon who couldn't step out in the sun and who needed to consume human flesh to survive. From that point on, his one true obsession was to live eternally and conquer sunlight, and for that obsession, he's directly responsible for all the suffering in Demon Slayer. Muzan doesn't care about anyone but himself. To him, humans are just food or test subjects. In fact, the second data book revealed that in his early years as a demon, he verbally abused his wives so horribly that 5 of them ended up killing themselves. He has a god complex so delusional, he calls his actions an unavoidable calamity that others should simply accept. But the truth is, Muzan is shamelessly pathetic. He hides behind his minions to do his dirty work, and whenever things don't go his way, he throws violent tantrums and just lashes all over the place. I'd say at the end of the day, Muzan's misanthropy, his belief that all humans are worthless, comes from one thing: his resentment of his own former human weakness. And here's the most ironic part. In his final moments, he's forced into the form of a baby, a form that embodies total helplessness, the very thing he fears most. Next, at number 5, it's Makima from Chainsaw Man. She sees people as nothing more than disposable dogs, meant to obey her every command. She is also the true mastermind behind much of the death and devastation in Part 1. After all, she is the control devil, and her contract with the Japanese Prime Minister transferred any fatal damage she received to a random Japanese citizen, which meant she effectively had as many lives as there are Japanese citizens. Makima weaponizes affection and emotional dependency to achieve her goals. She gave Denji a home, took advantage of his loneliness by leading him on, and even gave him a found family with power and Aki, only to later kill them both to psychologically break him. Wait, that was her way of showing love? No, Denji figures out the truth right as he defeats her. She couldn't even track him because she never bothered to learn his scent. That just proves she never cared about him at all. Her endgame was to create a better world, free from war and fear. But this so-called peace would only come by placing all of humanity under her control, and you know it's bad when even the US president calls it the worst kind of peace. Still, I wouldn't say she's as bad as some of the others we've discussed so far. There's that scene where she quietly cries in a movie theater while watching 2 guys hug. And Pacifista himself explains that her actions came from a genuine, if twisted, desire to form relationships. She wanted a family, or to put it even more simply, the control devil wanted hugs. But here's the thing, her extremism was always a deliberate choice. The fact that her reincarnation, Nayuta, is so different proves that the control devil's evil nature was all Makima. Now at number 6, we have someone from Jujutsu Kaisen, and while you may be thinking it's Yuji's uncle Sukuna, or maybe Mahito the troll, it's actually Yuji's mother, Kenjaku. Unlike Sukuna, whose backstory is genuinely tragic, or Mahito, who's literally a curse born from humanity's fear of itself, Kenjaku has no reason at all for being this evil. He did it all just for laughs. And you know it's bad when the good guys of Jujutsu Kaisen admit they'd rather let Sukuna, the king of curses himself, rampage across Japan than allow Kenjaku's plan to succeed. Kenjaku is a self-interested sociopath who sees his allies, and even his own children, as nothing more than pawns in his grand experiment. Noritoshi Kamo, the most evil sorcerer in Jujutsu history, was actually just one of the bodies Kenjaku had controlled over the past 1,000 or so years. As for what he did as Kamo, when a woman came to the Kamo temple, Kenjaku subjected her to an absolutely depraved series of experiments which resulted in 9 pregnancies. He then aborted the fetuses and reincarnated them into the cursed womb, death paintings, or simply put, Yuji's siblings. He helped Sukuna split his soul into cursed objects so he could reincarnate in the present day, which makes Kenjaku also responsible for Sukuna's continued existence and all the crimes he committed. The Shibuya incident, which is basically the most deadly act of terrorism in Jujutsu history, was all his doing. And let me add, on top of everything you already remember, he also unleashed 10 million curses just for distraction. His ultimate goal was to force all the humans in Japan to merge with Master Tengen to form a world-ending abomination that would almost certainly destroy everything. And he was gonna do it only for fun. Now, his fight with Takaba was indeed fun, but not in a way that softens his image, because to him, the end of the world and the comedy with Takaba were both just one thing, satisfying his own amusement. Moving on, how about an evil character who doesn't even see themselves as one? Coming in at number 7 is Regulus Corneas, the Sin Archbishop of Greed from Re:Zero. He constantly calls himself a respectable man and rants about others violating his human rights or freedom of speech, but in reality, he's far worse than anyone he condemns. He forced an absurd number of women into marriage, and if that wasn't enough, he killed their families and friends and treated them like lifeless objects without free will. He would even kill them over something as small as smiling. No wonder his wives are so broken under his abuse that many prefer death over staying with him. And it gets even worse when it's revealed that he's been using their hearts and lives to maintain his invincibility all along. The insane part is that he justifies his actions with excuses like, everyone's looking down on me, even though that's not true. His family actually loved and supported him, but instead of appreciating this, he despised them and twisted their kindness into pity. After gaining the witch factor of greed, he murdered his family and his entire village, and then forced his childhood crush to marry him by killing everyone she cared about. Even on the verge of death, Regulus showed zero remorse. His last moments were spent ranting about killing Subaru, Amelia, and Reinhard. His death was extremely graphic, and the narrative made it clear that he deserved every bit of it. Not to mention, he only made it worse by resisting so much. And yet, he isn't quite as bad as Kenjaku, because he lacks the perspective to even understand how evil he truly is. Plus, even in death, he's portrayed as comically pathetic. He's more concerned about Subaru and the others looking down on him than himself. His worldview was so warped that he convinced himself he was merciful and just. Basically, he knew right and wrong, but he just twisted all to make himself the victim. And despite what he did to her, he did love his first wife. He even gave her a proper grave, unlike his later wives. His obsession with forcing women into blank, expressionless roles came from trying to cope with her death. Alright, after all that pure evil, I'm gonna put Eren Yeager here at number 8, just for a bit of comparison. Eren Yeager is technically not evil. He was basically a slave to fate itself, but his actions top many of the other characters in this video. When you step back and look at everything he does from an objective point of view, he seems worse than half the people on this list. For one, he is directly responsible for his mother's death. His future self stopped the Smiling Titan from eating Bertolt and instead guided it to kill his own mother, all to set in motion the chain of events that would eventually, inevitably lead to the rumbling. And during the rumbling, he wiped out 80% of humanity. His eyes are closed, but he is still the one personally leading millions of wall titans as they flatten billions of men, women, and children. Of course, that is indefensible. Eren's actions are objectively evil, but what makes him different from the other characters on this list are the moral complexities. We see him completely break down when apologizing to Ramsey. There's that sequence where he tells Mikasa, "I've always hated you," despite the fact that they'd always loved each other. And he even beats Armin's ass, even though they'd been best friends since forever, all because he was trying to push them both away. And then you have his final conversation with Armin, where he lays bare just how helpless and desperate he's always been. In the end, Eren may not be evil in the same sense as Regulus, Kenjaku, or Muzan, but he caused death and destruction on a scale far greater than any of them. Number 9 is Light Yagami. He starts off as a brilliant high school student with an idealistic sense of justice, but over time he sheds even the smallest pretense of morality. The first real test came when Lyndell Taylor called him evil on TV, and Light killed him immediately. Now, we know that Lyndell Taylor was already on death row, but Light didn't. From his POV, he killed a man who opposed him, effective immediately. From there, his descent into God complex is fast. While some fans debate whether he was always evil or became that way because of the Death Note, the narrative makes it clear the seed of his God complex was always there. According to Ryuk himself, Light wasn't the first human to use a Death Note, but he was the first to write as many names as he did. That was in chapter 1. Just imagine how many people Light killed after that. Honestly, if I were to borrow the words of Walter White, Light liked it. He was good at it. And he was alive. I mean, he even laughed like an absolute maniac at Elle's grave. When he wrote Naomi Misora's name, he actually enjoyed the thrill as she turned around and went home to commit die. He was a classic narcissistic abuser with Misa Amane and basically every girl associated with him. He exploited her devotion while using Rem's love for Misa to manipulate her into sacrificing her own life to kill Elle, and manipulated Kiyomi Takada into becoming his queen, only to have her burn herself to death the moment she was cornered. Even his own family wasn't safe. Light actually considered killing his sister Sayu when she was taken hostage by Mello, and when his father was on his deathbed, he prioritized extracting Mello's name over saying anything else. Truly unhinged. Light is pure evil. In fact, Light is worse than even the actual evil villains of many other anime. For example, number 10 is All for One, and you can genuinely make a case for how he's not as bad as Light. Of course, that doesn't mean he wasn't bad. Unlike Unlike most My Hero Academia villains, All For One is almost never presented sympathetically. His obsessive ass abused and eventually murdered Yoichi, his own younger brother. He slaughtered generations of One For All users and wiped out their entire family lineages, including women and children. He even kept All Might's mentor Nana Shimura's hand as a disgusting keepsake, which he later gave to Shigaraki. And speaking of Shigaraki, he engineered Tamura Shigaraki's tragic origin by manipulating Kotaro Shimura and orchestrating the event that killed his entire family. Then he adopted and groomed Tenko into both a weapon of spite and a vessel for himself. He routinely turned children into nomus through experiments and kidnappings. He ran black market rings for illegal quirk fights and other stuff. He destroyed Kamina Ward and forced All Might into retirement. He orchestrated the Tartarus prison break, which almost destroyed Japan as a state. All For One is the perfect antithesis to All Might. While All Might is the symbol of peace, All For One is the symbol of evil. His ultimate goal was to plunge the entire world into a dystopian wasteland that only he could control. To that end, he destabilized other countries through villain uprisings. And yet, I said he may not be as bad as Light. We know All For One did love his brother. In the end, when he sees Yoichi's vestige fading, he panics and begs his little brother not to leave him again, before finally admitting that he loved him. This final moment of reunion with Yoichi humanized him, and this kind of thing happens often with shonen villains, especially in series like Naruto. But what if I told you there's an actual, truly evil villain in Naruto? At number 11, I'm gonna give you a character who is genuinely, irredeemably evil. It's Hidan. As an immortal follower of the evil god Jashin, and I'm not being performative here, Jashin literally translates the evil god. Hidan performed depraved rituals where he and his victims share pain. He enjoyed every single bloody second of it. He had many bodies, and in the official databooks, it's revealed that even before becoming a Jashinist, he had no problem killing his own village just because he was angry it had become a tourist attraction. And then there's his most infamous feat, the slow, painful killing of Asuma Sarutobi right in front of Team 10. And I'd say Hidan is a valuable character for this list precisely because of his simplicity. He's very different from your average Naruto villain, and I bet he wouldn't have even flinched at Naruto's Talk no Jutsu. He was the only Akatsuki member who didn't respect their leader, Pain, and he even openly declared his intention to kill him. Now, after Naruto, there's a pure evil character from One Piece. Number 12 goes to Saint Saturn, the warrior god of science and defense. I know there's also characters like Enel, Doflamingo, Saint Charlos, Hody Jones, the list goes on. But out of all the One Piece villains whose arcs are already finished, Saint Saturn is hands down the most evil. And again, I'm not talking about characters like Figarland Garling or Emu, because they haven't exited the story yet. This is all about Saturn. Unlike the pathetic entitlement of someone like Saint Charlos, Saturn's villainy is rooted in a cold, unhinged apathy toward human life, which he casually views as insects. He oversaw the native hunting competition at God Valley, where celestial dragons literally hunted and killed natives for sport. He and the other elders also ordered the complete annihilation of the island of Ohara, and even called Akainu impotent for failing to kill Nico Robin. But perhaps most importantly, Saturn is the man most responsible for destroying Kuma and Bonnie's lives. He experimented on Ginny and Bonnie, and he caused the Sapphire Scales disease that eventually killed Ginny. And when Bonnie contracted the same disease, Saturn exploited it by making Kuma trade away his free will and dignity just to secure treatment for his daughter. During the Egghead incident, he was enjoying himself when he entered the Pacifistas to kill Kuma and Bonnie because it meant the daughter Kuma did so much to save would die at the hands of the Pacifistas that looked just like him. He called it the height of folly and a fitting end of the insect she is. And Oda clearly knew how irredeemable Saturn was because, unlike most villains who survive or get an off-screen death, Saturn was killed right on screen. It was a satisfying end for the most irredeemable One Piece arc villain yet. Plus, to make it even better, Oda had him beg and plead to Imu right before his death, a fitting end for the insect he never knew he was. How very ironic. Alright, after Naruto and One Piece, at curse number 13, there's Dragon Ball. Every Dragon Ball villain is pretty evil, but if you had to choose just one as the most evil, who would it be? Frieza, Cell, Kid Buu, or maybe Moro? Nah, it's Goku Black, and I don't think this is even up for debate, because that scene where Zamasu switches bodies with Goku, kills him, and then slaughters Chi-Chi and Goten with a Keyblade is easily the single most horrifying moment in the entire Dragon Ball canon. The sheer brutality of the act and the fact that he did it wearing Goku's face makes it sadistic on a level Dragon Ball had never gone before. He then later also also kill future Bulma while looking like Goku. Next, if we're talking scale, he killed an incomprehensible number of people alongside future Zamasu. And the reason he could do it on a scale worse than almost anyone else besides Zeno was because he eliminated all opposition by murdering every Supreme Kai in the future timeline. That's insane because killing the Supreme Kais meant committing genocide against his own kind, but he did it, and as a result, the future gods of destruction and their angels were taken out of the chat. It's clear he was willing to go to any length for his Zero Mortals plan. It's also ridiculous because in Dragon Ball, both the Supreme Kais and the gods of destruction were once mortals themselves, but it's not like the Dragon Ball villains have ever been known for logic. Still, as I said, Goku Black stands out as the most evil villain in the entire canon, unlike villains like Frieza or Broly, who were raised as tyrants, or beings like Cell and the androids, who were created to be killing machines, or even characters like King Piccolo and Kid Buu, who were literally created from evil itself. Zamasu was different. He was originally a Supreme Kai apprentice, a being whose job was to protect the universe, yet he willingly chose to become evil, all because of his delusional belief that mortals were corrupt and unworthy of existence. He has no redeeming qualities or comedic moments, and fun fact, he's the first and only villain in the franchise to kill Goku without it being part of a sacrifice. Alright, with that said, these were some of the most unhinged evil anime characters ever written, but of course, we're only just beginning the discussion. So how about this? If this video hits 1,000 likes, I'll make a part 2 from the characters y'all mention in the comments, like maybe Esdeath from Akame ga Kill or Johan from Monster. So tell me, who's your favorite evil anime character?